I'd bought the house 3 years before the accident, a modest two-bedroom in a decent neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Every mortgage payment came from my account until the final payment 18 months ago. The satisfaction of owning something outright felt like the first real accomplishment of my adult life. What my family didn't know was that I'd been covering their expenses for years. Mom and Dad's mortgage, $2,300 a month. My sister Katie's car payment, $580. The utilities, insurance, and occasional repairs. Nearly $4,000 a month pulled automatically from my account through carefully labeled transfers. I never mentioned it. They never asked where their sudden financial stability came from. I worked as a senior project manager for a medical device company, good salary, better benefits, the kind of job that let me help my family without feeling the pinch, the kind of job that came with excellent health insurance, which became critically important on a Tuesday morning in October. The other driver ran a red light at 40 miles per hour. My car crumpled like paper. I don't remember the impact, the ambulance, the emergency room, or the first 3 weeks in the ICU. My first memory after the intersection was waking up 4.5 months later with a breathing tube down my throat and no idea where I was. I learned what happened during those months, piece by piece, from medical records from my lawyer and from the detective who eventually took my statement. My family learned about my finances too. When someone's in a coma, unconscious and unresponsive with a traumatic brain injury, someone has to manage their affairs. Katie petitioned for emergency power of attorney. The court granted it. She gained access to my accounts to pay my bills, manage my property, and handle my life while I couldn't. The legal system assumes family will act in your best interest. Usually that assumption is correct. My family discovered several interesting things while I was unconscious. They discovered my house was paid off. They discovered the automatic payments flowing from my account to theirs every month. They discovered I'd been funding their lives while living modestly in my own. And they made decisions. According to the bank statements my lawyer eventually obtained, the automatic payments to my family continued for the first 2 months of my coma. Then Katie adjusted them, reducing Dad's mortgage payment from what I'd been covering to the actual minimum due, cutting her own car payment support in half, and redirecting $1,500 monthly back to my account. Not out of concern for my finances, but for theirs, because they'd found a better source of income. My house sat empty while I was in the coma. Empty homes are wasted money, Katie told the tenants she eventually found. It just makes sense to rent it out temporarily until my sister recovers. The house was just sitting there, after all, not being used, not generating income. She listed it for $2,800 a month and found tenants within 2 weeks, a young couple with a baby, good credit, stable jobs. They signed a lease with Katie's name on it, paid the first month's rent and a security deposit, and moved into my house 6 weeks after my accident, while I was still on a ventilator in the ICU. Katie collected the rent every month, depositing it into an account she'd opened in her own name. She used it to cover the bills I'd been paying for the family, pocketing the difference. My belongings went into a storage unit, the cheapest one she could find. Some items didn't make it to storage, too much hassle to move, she'd later say. The medical team wasn't optimistic about my recovery. Severe traumatic brain injury, extended coma, minimal brain activity in those first weeks. They prepared my family for the possibility that I might never wake up, and if I did, that I might not be the same person. But brains are strange things, resilient in unexpected ways. At 16 weeks, I started showing responses. Small things at first. Eye movements tracking sounds, fingers twitching when nurses checked reflexes. At 18 weeks, they removed the ventilator. I breathed on my own. At 19 weeks, I opened my eyes. The return of consciousness wasn't like the movies. It was gradual, confusing, exhausting. Days blurred together. I couldn't speak around the feeding tube, couldn't move my left side well, couldn't remember why I was in the hospital. Memory returned in pieces. The occupational therapist worked with me daily. 4217 Oak Street, I said, words slurred but clear enough. The first complete sentence I'd managed in days. The therapist smiled and noted it on her chart. Progress. 2 weeks after waking, discharge planning began. I'd need rehabilitation, home health care, and occupational therapy. The social worker came to discuss arrangements. You'll need a safe environment for recovery, she explained. Someone to help with daily tasks while you rebuild strength. You mentioned you live alone at 4217 Oak Street? Yes, my house. She glanced at her tablet. frowning slightly. On showing current occupants at that address. A family of 3 with a lease agreement on file with the county. The words didn't make sense. I stared at her, trying to process through the fog that still clouded my thoughts. What? The property records show tenants and residents. Is there another address? That's my house. My address. She made a note. I'll have our case manager follow up. There might be some confusion with the records. There wasn't confusion. There was Katie, sitting beside my hospital bed that evening, explaining it like she was doing me a favor. We had to make some practical decisions while you were sick, she said. The house was just sitting empty. You weren't using it. Empty homes are wasted money, you know? So we found tenants. Nice family. They're taking good care of the place. You rented my house. Temporarily. Just until you recovered. We didn't know if you'd recover actually. The doctor said probably not. We had to be realistic about finances. It's my house, Katie. I have power of attorney. I'm legally allowed to manage your property. And I did manage it. I found good tenants, collected rent, kept the place maintained. You should be grateful, honestly. The rental income helped cover your bills. My bills. The same bills I've been paying for her for years. I looked at my sister and felt something cold settle into my chest. Where's the rent money? It went toward family expenses. Your expenses are expenses. Everything's connected when someone's in a coma. Someone has to keep things running. I want to see the financial records. You're still recovering. Don't stress yourself out over paperwork. Everything was handled properly. But I could stress myself out. I could make phone calls once my speech improved. I could request records. I could contact the lawyer whose car I'd kept in my wallet, the one I'd used when buying the house. Thomas Brennan had handled my real estate closing 3 years ago. He came to the hospital 5 days after my conversation with Katie, carrying a folder full of documents I'd asked him to pull. Your sister had no legal authority to rent your property, he said without preamble. Power of attorney allows her to maintain your property, pay your bills, and manage your affairs in your best interest. It doesn't allow her to generate income from your assets for her own benefit. She said it was temporary. Doesn't matter. The house is in your name only. She's not on the title. She's not on the deed. Any rental agreement she signed is fraudulent. She's been collecting money for a property she doesn't own and has no legal right to lease. How much? He consulted his notes. Based on county records and the lease agreement on file, $2,800 monthly for 5 months, $14,000 in rent, plus a $5,600 security deposit. $19,600 total, minus whatever she actually spent on property maintenance, which appears to be nothing. She said it covered my expenses. Your expenses were covered by your own money. Your checking account had sufficient funds. Your insurance covered medical costs. You didn't need rental income from your own house. He paused. There's something else. I pulled your bank records with the authorization you signed. You've been making substantial transfers to family accounts for years, monthly payments to your father, your mother, and your sister. None of that was documented as loans. I was helping them. They were dependent on you financially, then exploited your property while you were incapacitated. That's not just civil fraud. That's criminal. The word hung in the air. Criminal. What do you want to do? Thomas asked. I thought about Katie sitting beside my hospital bed, justifying theft as property management. Thought about my parents, who'd said nothing, who must have known. Thought about waking up homeless in my own life. I want to file a police report. Detective Maria Santos took my statement 2 days later, sitting in my hospital room with a recorder and a notepad. She listened without interruption while I explained everything. The house ownership, the rental, Katie's power of attorney, and the money she collected. Do you have documentation of ownership? She asked. My lawyer has everything. Title deed, mortgage records showing it's paid off, all in my name only. And you didn't give permission for the rental? I was in a coma. I couldn't give permission for anything. She nodded slowly. Power of attorney is tricky. Courts grant broad authority in medical emergencies, but there are limits. Using your assets for personal gain crosses the line, especially when you're collecting money and not properly accounting for it. What happens now? I'll investigate, interview your family, review the financial records, talk to the tenants. If the evidence supports criminal fraud, I'll forward it to the district attorney for charges. The investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, I moved from the hospital to a rehabilitation facility, relearning to walk without a cane, relearning to write with my left hand, relearning to live in a world where my family had tried to profit from my tragedy. Detective Santos called on a Thursday morning. We're filing charges. Multiple counts of fraud, theft over $10,000, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The DA's office is handling it now. All three of them? Your sister primarily, since she signed the rental agreements and collected the money. Your parents as accessories if we can prove they knew and benefited. The evidence is pretty clear. Katie called me that afternoon screaming, "You called the police? On your own family? You rented my house without permission and kept the money. I had power of attorney. I was legally managing your property. For your benefit, not mine. That's fraud. You're going to send me to jail over a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding. You saw an opportunity when I was unconscious and you took it. You collected $19,000 for my property. You used money meant to help you while I helped you, and then stole from me when you thought I couldn't stop you. We're family, Emily. Family doesn't do this to each other." "You're right," I said. "Family doesn't rent out their sister's house while she's in a coma, but you did." She hung up. Mom called an hour later, then Dad. Both delivered variations of the same message. I was being unreasonable. Katie made a mistake but meant well. Family should forgive family. Pressing charges was extreme. I said the same thing to all of them. "Drop the charges yourself," Dad said. "Tell the DA you don't want to prosecute." I didn't file the charges. The state did. It's out of my hands now. That wasn't entirely true. I could have asked the DA to drop it. I could have written a letter explaining I didn't want my sister prosecuted, but I didn't. The arraignment was scheduled 6 weeks after I left rehabilitation. I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom on my first day outside a medical facility. Katie stood before the judge in a blazer I recognized, one she borrowed from my closet years ago and never returned. The judge read the charges: fraud, grand theft, financial exploitation. Katie pled not guilty. Her lawyer argued it was a family misunderstanding that she'd been trying to help, and that power of attorney gave her authority. The prosecutor presented my ownership documents, the rental agreements Katie had signed in her own name, the bank records showing deposits into her personal account, and the timeline of her reducing my family support payments while collecting my rental income. Bail was set at $50,000. Dad looked at me from across the courtroom, his expression somewhere between pleading and angry. I looked away. Katie made bail. The trial was scheduled 4 months out. In the meantime, I got my house back. The tenants were victims too, innocent people who'd signed a lease with someone who had no right to offer one. They left without fighting, without demanding compensation they had every right to request. I walked into my house 3 months after waking from the coma. It smelled different, looked different, felt different. But it was mine, still mine. I kept every document, every record, every piece of paper that proved ownership. Because I'd always been careful, always kept receipts, maintained files, documented everything. That carefulness had seemed excessive when I was healthy. It became evidence when I was vulnerable. The trial lasted a week. The evidence was overwhelming. Katie, on the stand, couldn't explain why she collected money for property she didn't own, why the rental income went to her account instead of mine, or how any of her actions benefited me rather than herself. The jury took 4 hours to convict on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later: 3 years probation, full restitution of $19,600, and 200 hours of community service. No jail time, but a felony conviction that would follow her forever. My parents tried to reconcile afterward. Phone calls I didn't answer, emails I deleted. They needed help, they wrote. Katie couldn't find work with a criminal record. Dad's consulting had dried up. They needed family support. I thought about the $4,000 monthly I'd sent them for years, about it funding Katie's scheme to rent my house, about empty homes being wasted money. Then I blocked their numbers and moved on. Because some betrayals can't be forgiven. Some violations of trust can't be repaired. Sometimes the only thing left to do is keep your documents, protect your assets, and remember that the people who exploit you in your darkest moments will always be capable of doing it again. My house isn't empty anymore. I live in it, recovered and rebuilding. The mortgage is paid off, the title is in my name, and every door has a new lock. And I keep all my documents, just in case I ever need to prove ownership again.